So you want to make a deal with your patron. You know what you want, but do you know what your patron wants? Well, you're in luck, because behind today's secret door, what patrons want. So behind today's secret door, what patrons want. This is Secret Door, a channel devoted to in-depth discussions about Dungeons & Dragons, and my name is Matt Morich. I have started a new Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the channel, it would be greatly appreciated and much needed. The link will be in the description and in the pinned comment. Many thanks to Marcelo for your support. Thank you so much. So in this video, I'm going to talk about what your patrons are going to want from you in your contract as a warlock. This can become a difficult thing for a player to figure out sometimes because, let's face it, a player's natural instinct is to not want to create problems for themselves. But if you follow that compulsion, and it's very natural and it's very normal, if you follow that compulsion, you're really missing out on some opportunities. I'm going to give you 8 different ideas. They're kind of, in my view, archetypes of what a patron might want. They're certainly not the only things that a patron might want or the all-inclusive list. They're just 8 general archetypes of how I think a patron would look at a warlock and how they would, what kind of service they might expect from that warlock. Why is the patron making this deal? It's generally obvious why the warlock wants the deal, but why is the patron in the deal? The purpose of this video is to help you answer that question, hopefully in a creative way, because these archetypes that I'm going to describe to you are going to be very malleable, and they not only will they be malleable, they just may simply kickstart your own ideas, and that's really all I can hope for in doing a video like this. So what the video will talk about, I'm going to go through the 8 different archetypes, and then I'm going to talk at the end about what might happen if you fail in that arrangement. What are the penalties for failure? What happens if you don't live up to your end of the bargain? Again, this is a very difficult thing for a player to want to embrace. I encourage you to try and embrace it as enthusiastically as you can. You're going to find that having limitations, having things that are a distraction or a problem for you, I'm not talking about constant problems or a constant distraction. That's going to be a problem for the entire group. I'm talking about things that will come up from time to time that you'd rather not do, that it's a pain. It costs you something to have to go do this. Those kind of complications are the things that make a character tick. Those are the things that give a character life and depth and make them fun to play. In fact, one of the reasons why players are drawn to warlocks, and warlocks are a very, very popular class, one of the reasons they're drawn to them is the sense of that dynamic. But I find that a lot of players are, not all players, of course, but a lot of players are reluctant to want to give teeth to that problem that the warlock faces. And it's the teeth that are going to make it interesting. It's the terms of that contract. I'm not going to get into specific legalese ideas. We're going to talk about the penalty phase at the end, and we're going to talk about why the patron is structuring the deal with you to begin with. What are they after? Some of these archetypes are going to lend themselves very obviously to certain patrons, but I will invite you to think in the exact opposite. It's meaning that if the fiend seems a natural fit for this kind of archetype, think instead about what would a celestial do, or what would an archfey do, or a great old one. Just think about other patrons than the obvious fits will make for a more interesting spin and a more distinct kind of character and patron interaction. In addition, with those 8 archetypes, I'm going to touch very briefly on what a character who is only planning a 1-level or maybe 2-level dip into Warlock, how they might approach these things, because that's going to be very different. A character that is simply dipping into the class for that low of a level commitment should have a different perspective on the role-playing relationship that they have with their patron. And I want to touch on that. I'm not going to spend an enormous amount of time on it. Ironically, because I think a great deal of people who are playing Warlocks are 1-level or 2-level dipping them. But for that reason, because it is so popular, I feel that it's important to at least touch on it. Of course, any of these ideas could be used in full measure with a 1-level or 2-level dip, of course. But I find that if that's all the character is doing, they're probably doing it really for mechanical reasons. Any kind of role-playing reason you can get out of it is going to be great. Okay, so we're going to start with these archetypes. They are not in any specific kind of order. The beginning one is not lesser than the last one by any means. These are simply in the order that I wrote them down. Okay, so the first archetype, as I see it, is what I'll call the game. So in this idea, the patron is involved in some kind of cosmic game with other cosmic beings. So depending on what your patron is, they may be associating with having that game with, let's say it's a genie, with other genies. There could be a game amongst other genies. If it's a fiend, it could be with other devils and demons, etc., etc. But it doesn't have to be. It could be just simply other cosmic beings that are involved in this game. What is that game is the question. I would view in this respect that the Warlock is essentially a playing piece in that game for the patron. Now, this game could be a very serious game, or it could be a very leisurely, fun game from the patron's point of view. But regardless, they feel that it's important enough that they want to win. And because they want to win, they're willing to invest that Warlock with power to ensure that they win. Now, what this game could be anything, and you could be keeping score with it in any number of ways. It could simply be the amount of kills that the Warlock achieves throughout the course of their career. Any kind of game structure will do, and so the scoring will depend on what kind of game the patron is involved in, and whether it's actually a formalized game or game in a figurative sense, and that the patron is competing with other patrons in something that resembles a game, but is in fact deadly serious. It could also be something where the patrons feel that if they were personally to go to war with one another or to do battle with one another, that the stakes would be far too high. So they create their avatars, which are the Warlocks. And in a game like this, it's up to the Warlocks to figure out how of the different patrons. It's up to them to resolve this dispute in battle. So the game itself may be something rather Highlander-like. So the Warlock's task is to go and destroy or defeat other Warlocks of competing patrons. So anything like that will do. I mean, it's just the idea that the patron is involved in some form of competition with other cosmic beings, and that the Warlock represents something of value in that competition, is going to be a competitor in some form or another in that game, and that the patron wants to win. Those are the important ideas there. And the next idea would be, or the archetype idea would be the exile. And in this kind of an idea, the patron cannot enter directly into the prime material plane for some reason. It could be that this is a self-inflicted reason, or it could be a penalty or a curse or something that they're under that prevents them from actively being involved in the prime material plane. But they want to be involved for some other reason in the workings in the prime material plane, and so they invest a Warlock with power to move about and enforce their will in the prime material plane. Now, what that is could be a number of things, and one of the obvious ideas here, one of the obvious fits in the exile would be something like the great old ones who are in that eternal slumber, and who knows why they're in that slumber. Is the warlock's task to try to find ways to break that exile for the patron, or to usher about their return to the prime material plane. This is a very classic idea, and the idea of the exile you'll see in many, 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 many forms in storytelling where you're dealing with any kind of cosmic being of any sort. This is a very common idea, but it's a very rich idea, because it is so old and so used. It doesn't mean that it's a stereotype in a negative sense. It just means that you're going to want to give it a little bit of spin, a little bit of a sprinkle on it if you're going to use it, because it has been used quite a bit. But it is such a classic idea that I would be remiss not to bring it up. And the next idea is the gift giver. This is a patron that is bestowing a gift upon a warlock with little to no strings attached. This is, for some reason, they feel that the warlock can do great things. Maybe there is a task attached to it, but there's no other real complications or strings attached. Go do good. As long as you do good with this, or bad, or whatever, the chaos, or whatever it is the task is, that as long as you follow along in that idea, the power is yours. This is very akin to some superhero origin stories. Green Lantern, Shazam are archetypes of this. Green Lantern, you could very easily argue, is a hexblade, because his patron, even though it's not directly his patron, but he's serving a magic weapon. I recognize the Green Lantern idea that it's not directly the weapon, it's the Guardians of Oa or whatever, but you get what I mean. It fits for the hexblade rather nicely, the Green Lantern idea. So I'm just bringing that patron up of the hexblade to give a possible idea of how the gift giver could work in a non-obvious way. There is another version of this that, I shouldn't say version, but it's very similar, sort of a brother or sister to this idea, which we'll get to later. And the next idea I'm referring to as the collector. So in this idea, the patron is a collector of something, and that could be anything. And the warlock's primary task is to acquire whatever it is that the patron is wanting collected. I used in the undead test drive the idea of, especially because it fits for an undead, that the warlock might be going out and finding artwork. And this could be artwork that's trivial, or it could be great works of art, or whatever works of art. This could be great works of art, or banal works of art, or works of art from only insane people, or only from particular kinds of people, or from particular kinds of cultures, or very specific subject matter. That's only with artwork. This could be food. It could be, it could be rare ingredients. It's a collector of something, and it wants more and more of those things. And those things could be banal, like all the things I'm mentioning, really, or they could be rather serious. So for the fiend, it could be collecting souls, for example, and how you get the collected item, whatever that is, to the patron is an interesting point. You'll have to work out some way with the DM, some form of ritual or something. I would imagine like maybe burying the item in a specific way would allow the patron access to be able to recover it. And in doing it in something like that, you wouldn't be able to just like say, stuff it in a sack, and that a special sack that the patron has given you. If you go with something like that, then you're giving the player a very indirect access to another dimension. burying it makes it in a very specific way is a bit different. And I'm just bringing that idea up as a way of not giving the player or having the player indirectly give themselves a power that they shouldn't really have. The important thing is not what it is or how you get it to them, but that this is your task. And when you see that, whatever it is, that's your job. That is your job. Not adventuring, not going out and saving the world. In the collector's eyes, your job is to go get that. And we'll get back. Remember, at the end of the video, we're going to be talking about what happens if you fail. And creating those kinds of paradoxes for a player willingly giving themselves a paradox like that is a game master's delight. And it will, provided that it's not a constant irritation to the other players will delight in it too. This could also be paired into the idea of the game itself. So the collector may be collecting in some kind of cosmic scavenger hunt, and that's the game. So you can marry these ideas and mix and match them and meld them in any number of ways. And so the next idea is the devotion patron. This is the brother or sister idea to the gift giver. And in this idea, the patron was enfeebled it doesn't have to be, but was perhaps enfeebled in some way, was in some lowly state. Again, maybe perhaps a curse. Maybe they lost a bet against a greater cosmic being, a god or something to that effect. And they're in some lowly state. And at some point, the warlock had come across the patron and helped the patron in that lowly state. And for that reason, the patron now feels a sense of gratitude and has now returned to their full flower, perhaps because of the warlock. And the warlock's actions being helpful in recovering that power, the patron lends them a portion of that back. So in that sense, there could be almost no strings attached as well, because this is part of the deal. I helped you. You're giving me this as a gift. There could be any number of other reasons as to why a patron might feel devoted to a warlock character other than them helping them in an enfeebled state like that. It could simply be that the patron is smitten with the warlock, or finds them so charming, or sees the potential in them, just fancies that warlock in some particular way that they feel, I'm going to help you. The next idea of a patron contract might be something like what we'll refer to as the Godfather. This is not a very original term on my part, and the idea is exactly what it sounds like. That this isn't a complicated deal, okay? I'm going to help you. I'm going to give you the power. And one day, and that day may never come, I'm going to call upon you for a service. You have agreed to this kind of an arrangement. You have a hanging question mark over you for the entire campaign. You can almost bet that favor is going to be enormous. And you can bet that when the patron calls that favor in, they're going to expect it to be done right away. You are handing the DM a complete adventure package that must be done immediately. This is like a DM's great... if you granted the DM a wish, this would often be a DM's wish, that they could just simply get the players to do what they want them to do on this adventure because it's their idea, and they want them to do it without any kind of hemming and hawing about it. This is a great way to give the DM that kind of adventure at least once. The ramifications for your failure could be so extreme that the party simply has no choice, regardless of how much trepidation they might have about it, how many other complications are going on in the campaign at that time. That favor has been called in, and everybody knows this means that if you don't do it, horrible things could happen. So the Godfather idea is great because it will always be hanging over the character's head, but will and it's going to be something the DM can always kind of hint at. And so in that sense, it's always flavoring the campaign, but it's not really directly doing anything until the DM decides to use it. And so for that reason, the Godfather idea is probably one of the most accessible and useful ideas of all of these patron contract constructs. And so the last two ideas here are also rather simple. So this one is family service. So in this kind of a contract, the player themselves did not make the deal with the patron, but an ancestor or other family member did. And per the terms of that deal, certain family members throughout the generations or whatever are bound by that contract to serve the patron. Perhaps once one of the family members passes on, X person of X generation is expected to pick up that mantle. Maybe you know about this, maybe your other family members know about this, or maybe they don't. But regardless, that's the predicament your player is in. Now, this is a great device for a character that you want, as a player, you want to be able to serve this patron because you love the idea of the patron maybe, and maybe you love the mechanics of it and the flavor of it and all those kind of things. Let's say the Fiend. The Fiend has a lot of baggage to it. And let's say you wanted to play a good character. It can be difficult to find good reasons why you would ever make that arrangement. A situation like this takes care of all of that. You are bound by a deal that you did not make. So your character could be anything, and you might even despise the patron, but you're bound to serve them by this deal. And in a situation like this, it could be that you were born with the Warlock powers, or they were nascent in you, and I'm sorry, not nascent, they were latent in you, and they come about at a certain age, whatever. If they're there from you from birth, you're treading into sorcerer territory. So, and maybe there's some ritual that has to be performed. Maybe there's an affirmation of the deal. Whatever the case may be, it is a great way of handling that conflict if you don't have a readily great idea yourself as to why you would ever serve a patron like that, why the character you're imagining would ever agree to a deal like that. And in fact, it can do the exact opposite. If you, it can have the same effect in an opposite way. You may not have had the idea for the character or the patron, but the idea of this kind of a contract creates that kind of a character idea, patron idea, where there is a great, almost adversarial approach to one another, but the character has no choice but to deal with the patron because an ancestor had already dealt with them. And the last form of contract is what I'll refer to as the hidden clause. Now, the hidden clause is an idea where the patron offers a deal to the character, and probably this is best done in a literal written contract. And despite how the character had looked over that contract and looked it over, they missed the hidden clause that patron had cleverly hidden within the contract. And that hidden clause has the effect of it being something like the Godfather idea, where there is a great service that comes unexpectedly, but you had agreed to it. You actually agreed to the exact terms of it, but you did it unknowingly. So you were tricked. And this is naturally going to create an adversarial dynamic between the patron and the warlock. Nobody likes being tricked. And especially if this is a really dirty trick that the patron is willing to have the player character do. In fact, the patron may have done this simply for the joy of watching that character have to do it. It may have been worth a cosmic being investing power into that person simply to watch them squirm at that one particular moment. And maybe it's a series of moments. The hidden clause doesn't have to be a one-off deal like the Godfather idea seems to imply. The hidden clause could be an ongoing nightmare for the player. And this again creates a escape hatch for why the player dealt with that patron that they wouldn't otherwise seemingly want to deal with. It helps exonerate that character from overt guilt. Sure, they may not have been wise to sign a deal with somebody like that, but you did your best and you looked it over and everything was fine, except that it wasn't. So before we get into the last part of the video, which is discussing what happens if you break the deal or fail in some way in the deal, I said that I would talk just briefly about multiclassing. The real point, if you're going to take a 1-level or 2-level dip as into Warlock, is to find a role-playing way to handle this that doesn't take over your character, but is at least role-playing it rather than just simply grabbing the mechanics of the class. So taking something like the Devoted or the Godfather or the Gift Giver ideas and using them as construct ideas for a 1 or 2-level dip would make a lot of sense. And you see ideas like this in Greek mythology, where a god or goddess or a lesser god or goddess just throws a little something at a hero in Greek myth, just a little bit of favor their way because they like them or they want to see this god fail that is competing with the other gods to foil the hero. So it wouldn't be anything if it were the Godfather, for example, construct that you did, that favor, because they're only offering you a little bit of power, 1st level, 2-level dip, is not going to be a titanic ask from the patron, but it is hanging over you and you are expected to do it. If you had taken 12, 13 levels in Warlock, the patron's going to have a much bigger ask from the Godfather point of view. Now, if you really want to be self-inflicting on yourself in that 1 or 2-level dip and you did the hidden clause, then of course, then you are really embracing the whole idea of it. But going with Devoted or Gift Giver or Godfather is probably the simplest way of handling that 1 or 2-level dip in a way that is still embracing the role play of the character class. So in closing, let's talk about what happens if you fail. What are the penalties for failure? Every contract has penalties like this. Patrons is going to have them as well. Now, the way D&D is structured, there really isn't a good way of handling a penalty such as the Warlock is no longer a Warlock. They are classless. You can't do it. You could arrange with the DM that if you were to break the deal, that you're going to become, say, a rogue and all your Warlock powers go away and you become the equivalent level of rogue, whatever the class is. But you would have to do that with the DM. It's such a big change in the character that it has to be something that the player is willing to play, even though it is, of course, a penalty. And I'm certainly not trying to say that playing a rogue is lesser than playing a warlock or anything of that sort, but you have to be a class. So removing the class is not really an option. But what I'm going to suggest are ideas that hindrances that the DM and the DM and the player have to be talking about this. The DM has really no right to demand any of these things from you. It's a question of what kind of teeth you want to give the contract, because that creates stakes for the player to deal with, for the character to deal with. And that's where you get into depth and you get into gravity of a situation. So it could be something to the effect of, when you fail in a task or you put off doing that task, that you start every day with, say, a level of exhaustion. I'm not saying that you start with another level of exhaustion day after day after day. Just simply you start every day with a level of exhaustion. That's a problem, but it's not so crippling that you can't participate in adventures at all anymore. But it is going to certainly be a problem for you. And it's going to be a problem that you want solved, and that's the thing. It could be something like your favorite spell known is lost or is no longer given life to you. It could be that your pact magic now doesn't work on short rests. It only works on long rests. So it effectively becomes like Mystic Arcanum. It could be that the patron's first level of power that it grants the Warlock is withheld. Now, that's probably one of the most interesting ideas. So you are still effectively a Warlock, but you are a patronless Warlock. And that may be the most symbolic of the ideas that and the most tangible teeth of it, that the patron's hand is being removed that visibly from you. So if you were the genie, if you were a genie Warlock, you can't go into the bottle anymore. Maybe the expanded spell list from the patron is also removed. It could be that the pact boon that you are granted is removed. So any of these kind of mechanical ideas can work, and you could use them in a sequence so that they are staggered based on the severity of the failure or the failure to even go off and try, refusal to try, whatever the case may be, that these stakes continue to mount. Now, going back into comics, a lesser known character, but a great character, and if you've never read this comic, give it a look. It's way back from the 80s, Nexus. Nexus has a classic, it's almost really great old ones, kind of Warlock relationship. And he derives his power from slumbering aliens, and those aliens invest him with enormous power. And they want him to go right cosmic wrongs, and he suffers hideous nightmares and splitting headaches and what have you until he does those things. And so he almost has no choice because he's so tortured night after night after night until he does what I forget what the name of the aliens were. But if you know, please mention it in the comments. But that's a great kind of model for a kind of penalty. Now, you could adapt that idea. So if you were thinking of something like the Archfey was your patron, or any of the patrons, but the Archfey I think would be particularly prone to this idea. As opposed to torturing you, they might just humiliate you. So the Archfey might decide if you failed and you're not trying hard enough, that they give you a pig nose and a pigtail. Or anything like that. Or the classic from Midsummer Night's Dream, putting the donkey ears on the character. Something that will humiliate the Warlock into action. It could be that you prematurely age 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. You lose tufts of hair. Your skin changes to some abnormal color. You could even lose the power of one of your senses. And that's not really humiliating. But I mean, the point is there's a number of ways that the patron could enforce a failure on the Warlock's part that could be severe, draconian, or simply so humiliating that the character has no choice but to go on and complete the task. Now, in closing, in discussing penalties, you really need to work this out with your DM. Now, let me caution you. I would like to say that all DMs are disciplined enough that if you gave them a very amusing idea of how to humiliate your character or create such problems for your character that it is in some way amusing, that a DM would be so disciplined that they would never think of using such a thing unless there were good reasons to do so. But we all know that isn't true. There are plenty of DMs that don't have that kind of discipline. So, and there are plenty of DM situations where they just can't wait to hose players and all that type of stuff. And I hope you're not in a game like that. But if you are, or your DM is not made of rock, discipline made of rock or iron, be really careful. And you almost have to write up a specific set of rules with the DM. This will happen only if I don't do this, this, or this. Something very specific so that this isn't just coming out of nowhere just to mess you over. Now, depending on what you've decided for the penalty to be, you may not find it so bad if the DM decides to just go ahead and use it on you in a capricious way. But I would strongly encourage you to get this up in writing for yourself and hand this to the DM and say, look, I don't have to be giving this to you at all. But if I fail in this particular way, I'm willing to suffer these kinds of effects for the sake of the game. I would put it in something like that, because this is something that you are doing for role-playing, not to hand a DM some kind of tool just to mess you over just because they'll get their kicks off of it. There's plenty of stories about DM's abuse of power, and I would hope that you all are not in that kind of a situation, but you might find yourself in one of those situations, even if the DM does not act like that normally. Just be very, very clear with the DM, and if the DM is reasonable and good, everything should be fine. But these are just the ideas I have of archetypes and some ideas for penalties that are reasonable. They could be severe, but also some of them could be amusing. So I hope that those are in some way helpful to you. Well, that's all I've got. If you enjoyed the video, please like, please share, please subscribe. If you're interested in supporting the channel, the help would be greatly appreciated. And if you're stuck and you don't know where to go, you can always search for a secret door. Until next time, I cast bless on all of you.